Good afternoon and welcome to the July 29th, 2020 Transportation Access Advisory Committee meeting. This is Jean Payton for the record. Before we begin, our staff liaison, David Gloria, will read the roll call, give us a list of the name of staff who are on the phone, and also do a few little housekeeping details. So David?
Thank you, Madam Chair. David Gloria, Management Analyst for the RTC for the record. I'll be calling your name in alphabetical order. Please confirm your attendance as I read your name. Havander Davis.
Present.
Raymond Fletcher.
Present.
Janae Gastione.
Present.
Dan Hyde.
Here.
Beth E. Logan. Beth has not joined the line yet. Dr. Christine Moninghoff.
Okay. I want to get one from Apple. They're like $500-600. Here.
Oh, thank you. Chuck Newhoner.
Present.
Chair Jean Payton.
Here.
And Ralph Steele. Ralph Steele, are you on the line?
Yes, he is.
Thank
He
you.
said here.
Okay, thank you. Please note that we also have several RTC staff on the line for today's meeting. This includes Mr. Francis Julian, Deputy CEO, Mr. Dan Howland, Director of Paratransit and Specialized Services, Mr. Sherwin Gutierrez, Director of Finance, Ms. Sydney Komarmi, Director of Human Resources, Ms. Antoinette Braddock, Manager of Paratransit Operations, Ms. Tanya Thomas, Quality Assurance Supervisor, Ms. Sue Christiansen, Engagement and Media Supervisor, Ms. Deb Reardon, Principal Transportation Planner, and Ms. Eileen Pastor, Government Affairs Supervisor, will be reading public comments. As the chair mentioned, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. When the chair asks for comments from the committee or calls for a vote, please remember to unmute yourself before speaking. Remember to state your name for the record before providing comment. Be sure to mute your line if you are not speaking. Voting will be done verbally. The chair will call for ayes and nays. If there are no nays, then the motion will carry. If there are nays, then a roll call vote will be required. In the event of a roll call vote, please wait for your name to be read to provide your vote. The chair will call for any comments or questions after an item has been presented. Thank you, Chair Payton.
Thank you, David. And one more housekeeping detail before we get to our meeting. Dan Howland will present to us some background on the changes to the public comment period. So Dan?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Dan Howland, Director of Paratransit and Specialized Services for the record. As you know, on March 22nd, 2020, the State of Nevada Executive Department issued Declaration of Emergency Directive 006, which suspended the requirement to have a physical location for public meetings. Pursuant to Directive 006 and for the health and safety of the community, this meeting is being held telephonically. Before we start public comment, I would like to announce to members of the public watching this meeting remotely that we will be holding a public hearing during item 12 regarding the proposed fall 2020 transit service changes. To allow for public participation, the RTC is accepting public comments via email at publiccomments@rtcsnv.com. Comments can be submitted to be read aloud or to be added directly to the written record. Additionally, comments or questions specifically concerning the proposed service changes may be submitted on the comments section of the YouTube live stream of this meeting. For the first citizens participation period, Ms. Eileen Pastor, Government Affairs Supervisor, will read the public comments received by the RTC. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dan. As Dan said, we are at our item number 1 on the agenda, which is our first public comment session. All comments need to be related directly to the agenda for today. The comments, as Dan mentioned, have been submitted either by email or on the RTC website. And Eileen will be reading any comments, reading the first 500 words of a comment. If there are more than 500 words, she will stop, but the entire comment will be included in the minutes of the meeting. So Eileen, do we have any public comments for this first session?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Eileen Pastor, RTC Government Affairs Supervisor for the record. Before we get into public comments, I just want to confirm 858, we've got a user on the line. Is this Beth Egan?
Yes, I'm here. Present.
Perfect. We will mark you present for the meeting. Thank you so very much. And again, Madam Chair, so for item number 1, there are no comments to a posted agenda item, and we will cover the service change public hearing comments during that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Item number 2 is the election of the chair and vice chair of the Transportation Access Advisory Committee for 2020-2021, and Dan Howland will handle that process. So Dan?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Dan Howland, Director of Paratransit and Specialized Services for the RTC. And we are going to, the Transportation Access Advisory Committee is going to elect the officers of chair and vice chair on an annual basis. They do this. So I'm asking, do we have any nominations for the positions of chair and vice chair for the committee to respond to?
This is Dan Hyde. I would like to nominate Gene Payton as chair.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any other nominations for chair? Hearing none, any nominations for vice chair from the committee members?
Yes, this is Evander Davis. I'd like to nominate Dan Hyde for chair, second chair, vice chair.
Thank you, Evander. We have a nomination of Dan Hyde for vice chair. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Hearing none, does anyone have any comments or questions before we vote? Hearing none, do I have a motion for the nomination of Gene Payton for chair? Say aye or nay if you are opposed. This is for all the committee members. You vote aye for yes and nay for no.
Aye.
Aye.
I think Ralph said aye. Has everyone voted who's on the committee for, because there was all ayes. All right, the ayes have it. Ms. Gene Payton is chair for another year of the Transportation Access Advisory Committee. Do we have a motion for Mr. Hyde as vice chair?
This is Jean Payton, and I move that Dan Hyde be elected vice chair of the TAAC committee.
Okay, we will vote. Thank you, Jean, for the motion. We will vote aye or nay. Committee members for Dan Hyde for vice chair.
Aye.
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 Okay, there were all ayes, no nays. So Dan Hyde is vice chair for the next year of the TAAC committee. Madam Chair, congratulations to you, Gene Payton and Mr. Dan Hyde, and I will turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you to all of you who supported my reelection and Dan's reelection. We love serving you, and so we really do appreciate it. Item number 3 is the approval of the minutes of the May 27, 2020 meeting, and I will entertain a motion to approve.
This is Dan Hyde, and I move we approve the minutes of May 27th, 2020.
Thank you, Diane. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes as they were sent and posted? Hearing none, all in favor of approving, please say aye.
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 Are there any nays? Okay, very good. Then the minutes have been approved. Thank you. Items 4 and 5 are the consent agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
It's Dan Hyde, so moved.
Thank you, Dan. If someone on the committee would like to discuss anything that appears on the consent agenda, it would need to be removed from the agenda. So if any of you have something you would like to discuss, please say so now and we'll remove it from the agenda.
Madam Chair, this is Raymond. I'd like clarification on number 4.
Okay, we'll pull number 4 then and we'll go ahead and, what is your question, Raymond?
Well, we're supposed to receive a report on the disposition of action items. Other than presentations over the last year that I've been on this committee, we haven't really discussed anything that we took any action on. We've seen the exact same presentations that take place at the RTC board meetings that we could easily watch on YouTube prior to us convening.
Madam
Chuck.
Chair, Dan Howland, Director of Paratransit, for the record. Mr. Fletcher has asked this question before, and what I will do is I am going to work with our liaison, David Gloria, and we will connect with Mr. Fletcher, and we will go over this question in detail, and we will get his questions answered, and then we will bring that back to the committee to let them know what our findings and what we will be doing moving forward. Is that agreeable, Mr. Fletcher?
I don't know what findings you speak of, but I guess.
Okay.
Okay, let's try that then. So I can tell you, Raymond, that there have been occasionally times when there's been something that's been carried forward, and that would appear there in that particular section of number 4, but that doesn't happen very regularly. So back to the consent agenda. I had a motion to approve. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Number 6, item number 6 is a presentation followed by approval of the Southern Nevada Coordinated Transit and Human Services Transportation Plan. And that will be, the presentation will be given by Deb Reardon. Deb?
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. I'm Deb Reardon for the record. Oh, and so since the draft plan was presented to the committee in May, today I'll really focus on a really quick recap, share highlights of the comments that we received on the draft plan, and next steps. So the plan purpose, just as a reminder, the plan focuses on improving mobility for people with disabilities, seniors, and low-income individuals whose transportation needs have continued to increase since the last plan was updated back in 2015. So this plan also serves as an important forum for coordination among transportation and also human service providers who were engaged in the plan throughout its whole development process through various outreach efforts. So speaking of outreach, next slide, please. Oh, thank you. The plan was developed through input of approximately 400 representatives from key organizations that represented urban and rural public transit, nonprofit, private transportation companies, and also government agencies. So outreach included 5 stakeholder committee meetings. We did over 24 interviews, 3 roundtable events. We went to 5 meetings of existing partners, and also an online inventory survey of over 100 providers, along with presentations at 8 RTC committee meetings. So outreach really occurred throughout the plan process, which included an evaluation of existing conditions and needs, an inventory of existing service providers, and a gap analysis. So the plan identifies 5 goals and over 30 strategies to achieve these goals. The plan also includes a framework for ongoing coordination and implementation. So the draft was available in May, and today I'll just share 5 themes that we heard through public, committee, and stakeholder comments that were included in the final draft. So first, partners shared a need to identify impacts of the pandemic on providing transportation, things like how social distancing impacts shared rides and declining revenue, as well as the need to coordinate sanitation protocols. So that's been added to the plan's conclusion. We also heard that transportation needs for low-income youth are continuing to grow. So the plan's been updated to reflect that transportation barrier to reach schools, and also the need for equitable transportation options to reach charter schools. We also added actions to provide more transit information and bus pass signups for youth at school sites. So third, we heard that there's continues to be a lack of accessible Uber and Lyft vehicles, and that was a barrier. And so this has also been added to the plan, and outreach and problem solving with these companies is also underway. So fourth, we heard that accessible paths of travel are an issue for rural areas in addition to near urban transit, and the related strategy has been updated to reflect this need. And lastly, there's ongoing interest to serve people outside of the paratransit boundary that's been addressed through strategies such as exploring more on-demand services. So our next steps, RTC committees are reviewing the final draft this month, followed by RTC board in August. And the stakeholder committee will also meet quarterly to facilitate implementation, and a first meeting has also been scheduled for August. So this concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Becky Logan. Yes, I just have a question. I know from all this, new plans that they've added, when are these going to be implemented?
Yeah, so this plan actually includes, with each strategy, a really specific list of implementation actions as well as roles. And we also identified from that bigger group of over 30 strategies, about a dozen or so priorities. And so actually, we've already started some implementation actions and are going to be convening that committee on August 11th to really kick that off. So we really see this plan as being something that is implemented, that doesn't sit on a shelf, and there's been a fair amount of energy among the committee to work on it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Are there other questions for Deb? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Ms. Dan, we approve as submitted.
Okay, thank you. And so all in favor, just a moment, I'm getting terrible feedback. Is anyone else?
No?
Madam
Okay.
Chair, I think we're okay on audio. If there's something that you're listening to in the background, that may need to be turned down, but I don't believe we're getting any feedback.
All right. I guess I'm getting it from myself. But anyhow, I would entertain a removal to approve. And that, Dan,
Yes.
did you do that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So all in favor of approving, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay, please. Okay, thank you. We have approved this. And Deb, thank you for your report.
Okay, thank you so much.
Number 7 is to receive a report on our RTC study of the Silver Riders program. And that will be given by Tanya Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tanya Thomas, Quality Assurance Supervisor for the record. Today I'll be presenting the results of a Silver Star survey that was conducted by the Paratransit Quality Assurance team. For those of you who may not be familiar with the service, Silver Star is a service that was designed to assist seniors by providing access to personal shopping needs, so connecting senior communities with grocery stores and pharmacies. There are 12 routes that operate throughout Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, and Henderson. They operate on a loop with designated stops at senior communities and neighborhood stores, and they typically operate 1 to 2 days per week. Prior to conducting this survey, we did not have a great deal of information on those that were using the service, as riders are not required to register or make a reservation or present any type of pass or identification. While we know that those using the service are primarily seniors, we did not have any additional demographics or information on whether or not they use other RTC services such as fixed route or paratransit. So the purpose of this survey was to collect this information and also to assess rider satisfaction with the service. The survey was conducted between October 2nd and 22nd of 2019. The surveys were conducted in person via paper or tablet, and they also were given an option to use SurveyMonkey online if they so chose. Respondents had the option to opt out of any question that they preferred not to answer, and they were able to remain anonymous. Next slide, please. Surveys were conducted on all 12 of the routes, and there were a total of 270 passengers that participated. This current slide shows the breakdown of respondents per route. Next slide, please. All but one respondent provided information on age group, with nearly 78% falling between the ages of 61 and 80, and an additional 11.48% indicating that they were aged 81 or over. Next slide, please. When asked about employment status, 93% of respondents indicated that they were retired. Next slide, please. In past years, the RTC has applied for and received grant funding for portions of this service from the Aging and Disability Services Department based on serving those age 60 and older, minorities, and low-income residents. We asked respondents to identify their income and tied the available responses to the poverty guidelines for the year. Approximately 29% of the respondents preferred not to answer, but of those willing to provide an answer, we found that about 65% indicated that their household income was $25,750 or lower. Next slide, please. The majority of respondents indicated that they live alone at 86.67%. Next slide, please. We asked participants about the use of mobility aids and found that 76.67% did not rely on the use of any mobility aids. Next slide, please. Respondents were also asked what other types of transportation they use in addition to the Silver Star service. 47% indicated they use other RTC services such as fixed route and paratransit. And one note about this slide, they were able to select all that applied, so you'll notice that the total exceeds the total number of respondents. Next slide, please. Approximately 33% of respondents indicated that they are currently certified to use RTC's paratransit service, and of those, 16% indicated that they use the service. Of those using the service, approximately 89% indicated that they had used the service in the past month. And one thing to note is the fact that the fare for Silver Star service is 50 cents compared to $3 for paratransit. So passengers may choose to use Silver Star for their shopping needs and then use paratransit for locations not serviced by Silver Star, such as medical appointments. Next slide, please. Respondents were asked several questions regarding their satisfaction with the service, including the days and hours the service operates, travel time, the helpfulness of operators, available seating, and timeliness. 87.78% indicated that they were satisfied with the days and hours that the service operates. Next slide, please. Silver Star operates on a loop, so some complexes are further away from their most used stop on the route, which is typically Walmart and grocery stores such as Smith's and Albertsons. With that said, 84.81% indicated that they were satisfied with the time it takes to get them from their residence to their most frequently used stop. Next slide, please. The highest level of satisfaction recorded was for the operators of the service, with 97.78% expressing that their operators were polite and helpful. Next slide, please. 92.22% of respondents indicated that their stops are serviced on time. Next slide, please. Finally, 92.59% indicated that they were able to find available seating at the times that they prefer to travel, which you'll see on the next slide is typically in the early hours. Next slide, please. The operating hours for the routes vary by route, but typically service begins between 8 and 9 a.m. and ends roughly between 2 and 4 p.m. And most respondents indicated that they prefer to travel in the morning prior to 10 a.m., so from the start of the route to those 10 a.m. Runs. And that is the end of my prepared presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tanya. Are there any questions for her?
Yeah, Tanya, this is Dan Hyde. I got a question. Is that I know the number of respondents was only 270. Do you have statistics on the number of riders that actually utilize the service?
We do, but we don't know if they're, so it runs several times a week. So I don't know if those are unique riders, of someone who rides just Monday or rides Monday and Wednesday, since they don't swipe, or we don't know exactly who's riding. We do have total numbers, which I don't have in front of me right now, but I could definitely get back.
I would really like to know how many riders that take advantage of that. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions? Well, thank you very much. That was quite interesting.
Thank you.
Item number 8 on the agenda is a presentation on the partnership between the RTCC and Capability Health and Human Services. And Dan Howland will be presenting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan Howland, Director of Paratransit and Specialized Services, for the record. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to remind the public that RTC staff is still collecting comments or questions regarding the proposed transit service changes through the YouTube live stream comment section or via email at publiccomments@rtcsnv.com. So now we will begin the presentation on the RTC's partnership with Capability Health and Human Services. Slide 1, please. So through the years, the RTC has partnered with several nonprofit organizations through the Vehicle Donation Program, which has assisted several agencies. And local media recently featured a story that focuses on one of those individuals who benefits from these types of partnerships. And we have this news story to show you today.
Hi, this is David. My computer just completely crashed, so give me a moment to reconnect. I apologize.
Yeah, we'll just wait a moment. Typically with vehicle donation program, for everybody who is listening, we have our paratransit cutaways, and we've had vans that have been used for paratransit and paratransit services. And once we retire them, they are in condition. Many of them are in condition where they are able to be donated. And that's what the vehicle donation program is about. And as we wait, just to let everybody know, our coordinated mobility program, that also helps fund the vehicle donation programs and programs that benefit from it. So without those funds, they couldn't operate the vehicle. Well, David, Gloria, I don't know if this video is going to run, and maybe we can show it later if you're able to get this working. But what I will say is that Capability Health and Human Services uses the vehicle to transport a person that hopefully we'll see in the video, and his name's Charles, to and from his place of employment, which is Sephora. And I have seen the video. It's a great video, and it's a great representation of this program and what the Vehicle Donation Program and the CMP, Coordinated Mobility Program, do for our community. So to receive donated vehicles through the program, an organization must be a nonprofit created for religious, charitable, or educational purposes that is located and operates in Clark County. Vehicles are, of course, provided based on availability. As I said, we're obviously going to provide vehicles that are available, but also in good working condition as well. And with that, Madam Chair, that concludes the presentation, unless the video's ready now, David. And if not, that concludes my presentation, and we'll try to watch the video later. Any questions?
Are there any questions for Dan? Okay, hopefully we will see that video before the meeting's over. So, but we will go on with the program to item number 7, which is the presentation on the final RTC budget for fiscal year 2021. And that will be given by Sherwin Gutierrez. So Sherwin?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Sherwin Gutierrez, RTC Director of Finance for the record. I'm here to present the RTC's fiscal year 2021 budget. Next slide, please. The RTC's total funding sources for fiscal 2021 is $748.6 million. There are several one-time items included in this budget: fund refunding at $125.7 million, non-recurring grants for transit at $176 million, and the use of cash balances in transit and streets and highways at $118 million. The total sources would have been $431 million if these one-time sources were not included. In comparison to fiscal 2020 budget, the team budgeted $593.8 million. The fiscal 2021 budget without the non-recurring items is $163 million, or 27% lower than the fiscal 2020 budget. In preparing the funding sources during the COVID-19 pandemic, the RTC team worked closely with local financial experts, Hobson and Associates, and applied analysis to come up with the budget estimates. Next slide, please. Sales tax revenue projected a decrease of $21 million, or 9% in fiscal 2020, and a decrease of $38 million, or 19% for fiscal 2021. The RTC team anticipates a recovery after the pandemic, similar to that of the most recent recession, which took about 5 years. Next slide, please. For the transit operating revenue, the team is budgeting $244.5 million. This includes several one-time use funds, such as $52 million in coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security, commonly known as the CARES Act, and a $22 million 5307 grant funding. 5307 grant funding is usually used for capital in transit, but some of it will be redirected for operations, mainly due to the significant decrease in sales tax and fare revenue. The CARES Act and the 5307 grant funding is helpful to address budget issues. RTC received $112 million in total CARES Act funding and plans to use approximately 60 million in fiscal 2020 and the other 52 million in fiscal 2021. Next slide, please. For the sales tax revenue allocated to streets and highways and Department of Air Quality, the team budgeted 40.7 million in fiscal 2021. It had originally been budgeted at 60.3 million pre-pandemic. Next slide, please. The RTC anticipates a 15% or 11.3 million decline in fuel tax revenue in motor vehicle fuel tax revenue for fiscal 2020, and a 33% or 20.3 million decline in fiscal 2021. Next slide, please. For fuel revenue indexing 1, RTC is budgeting 15% decrease or 13.9 million in fiscal 2020. And for fiscal 2021, the team is budgeting 33% decrease or $25.5 million. Next slide, please. Fuel revenue indexing 2 have a 2.1% increase effective July 1st of 2020. The anticipated revenue will be offset by pandemic impact and cause it to be flat for fiscal 2021. One thing to note, per Nevada revised statute, all fuel tax revenue can only be used on roadway projects. Next slide, please. The pandemic has caused a steep drop in ridership in both the general market and in the strip corridor that resulted in a corresponding decline in fare revenue. The team is projecting a 21% decrease for fiscal year 2020 and a 16% decrease for fiscal 2021 in the general market. The strip corridor revenue is projected to have a 37% decrease in fiscal 2020 and a decrease of 40% in fiscal 2021. Next slide, please. The next few slides we will discuss are related to the budgeted expenditures. Next slide, please. The total funding uses for fiscal 2021 is 748.6 million. Capital outlay is budgeted at 256.3 million, contracted services at 218.3 million, bond payment at 140.6 million, debt service at 90.2 million, and salaries and benefits at 43.2 million. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Capital outlay includes transit at 36% or 91.6 million, about 64% or 164 million for streets and highways. Streets and highways projects have not been reduced for this budget because there is a healthy cash balance in those funds to be able to support projects scheduled for fiscal 2021. Next slide, please. The transit capital budget is 91.6 million, but was originally budgeted at 132 million. It was reduced by about $40 million due to the pandemic. Grant funding was also reduced from 103.6 million down to 73 million. Next slide, please. For transit operating expenditures, contracted services makes up the majority of the budget at 86.1%, salaries and benefits at 8%, and transfers out at 5.9%. This comes to a total budget of 228.5 million. The fiscal 2020 budget was amounted to 262 million. Next slide, please. Majority of our contracted services costs are related to fixed route and paratransit services. For fixed route, RTC is projecting a lower expense due to lower ridership and a reduced level of service. RTC was operating a Sunday schedule for fixed route during the shutdown. Next slide, please. In contrast, paratransit contract costs are expected to increase. Staff anticipates an increase in rides as soon as customers can catch up on missed medical and other appointments during the pandemic. One thing to note, the RTC cost per ride is approximately $33 per ride. Next slide, please. For the Streets and Highways program, the anticipated revenues pre-pandemic were at 405 million. But with an estimated decline of 60.4 million, it leaves an estimated revenue at 344.6 million. With expenditures at 405 million, there is a structural imbalance of 60.4 million. Next slide, please. What is structural imbalance? A structural imbalance occurs when expected revenues are less than recurring expenditures needed to maintain current level of service. One-time resources can be used in the short term to reduce the amount of the imbalance. But if that is done on a continual basis, those resources will be exhausted and then more significant amount of reductions will be needed. Next slide, please. To resolve the structural imbalance for streets and highway funds, the RTC will use approximately 57.6 million from the streets and highways cash balance. Next slide, please. For the Transit and Administration Fund, there is a 152 million structural imbalance. There are several ways to resolve that imbalance. First, as previously mentioned, approximately 52 million in CARES Act and 22 million in 5307 formula grant will be used as one-time resources. Additionally, there is a reduction in capital outlay of 40.7 million and contracted services by 30.2 million. The RTC will use 1.3 million of cash reserves to help us solve the deficit. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Next slide. The remaining 5.8 million is resolved through hiring freeze, layoffs, furlough, and management pay cut. An approximate 2.2 million deficit remains and will be realized through additional cost containment. This concludes the fiscal 2021 budget presentation, and I will be happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Sherwin. That was pretty grim. Are there any questions for Sherwin?
Madam Chair, this is Dan Hyde. I got a question a couple of questions actually. First is on the fare box recovery. I was just taking notes that was on your presentation at 39.9 million. Historically, the RTC has had a great reputation of being the highest, one of the highest, if not the highest, fare box recovery in the nation. With this pandemic effect, how do we rate nationally now?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you, Dan. We are still in the process of collecting all of our data for fiscal 2020. The NTD data will be submitted around October 31st of this year. Once we have the information, we will provide it to the committee. So right now, we don't have that information yet readily available.
About the suggestion that's being considered by the RTC itself on service cuts. The one thing I'm mostly concerned about is in the paratransit area, and just for the people, if they're listening, is that by law, the ADA is required to have a certain perimeter that they cannot diminish certain mileage around, I think it's 1.5 miles or something?
3/4 mile.
Say that you have to make some drastic cuts because of the COVID-19, and you have a law that's in place that says you cannot diminish the service in paratransit. How are you going to address that?
Dan.
Yeah.
Dan Howland, Director of Paratransit for the record. So, Dan, you're asking if the service cuts are going to impact the paratransit service area or paratransit customers?
I should have worded it better. Yeah, I should have worded it better.
Proposed changes at this time will not impact the paratransit community.
Dan, that's really good news.
That are currently being served.
The only reason I'm asking that question is because a lot of people know I'm on this committee and they're asking me. And so now I can convey that to the people that are asking me that question. Thank you so much.
And one thing to add, Dan, in one of our slides, we showed that our paratransit budget for fiscal 2021, we did not reduce that one. So
Oh,
it actually went up.
that's even better news.
Yes, so that's one thing to note. Yes, we anticipate more rides after the pandemic to cover for those medical appointments or other appointments that were missed by a lot of our community members.
Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, Raymond, for the record.
Yes, Raymond.
When you were talking about paratransit services, does that include programs like the Tango Car?
Madam Chair, Dan Howland for the record. Tango Car is not paratransit service. It is a small supplementary service which services paratransit customers. At this time, Raymond, and that's something that we'll look at presenting more on, but our Ride on Demand program certainly has decreased in usage as the paratransit has, but at this present time, we have no plans to make any changes. And a lot of agencies, and I'm just speaking in general right now, but we can get more specific later, but these programs are being put into more wider use. So, but at this present time, we don't have any plans to change what we're doing with that supplementary program.
All right, a follow-up, if I may. You had mentioned that the cost per paratransit ride for the RTC is approximately $33. At this time, services like the Tango Car RTC cost per ride is $49.69 is what's on the invoice I typically get. Is there an opportunity to renegotiate that during this pandemic?
Well, Madam Chair, Dan Howland again for the record, and I have Antoinette Braddock, our manager of paratransit. She oversees the Ride on Demand program. And Antoinette, would you just speak to the invoicing that Mr. Fletcher is referring to, please? You're on mute, Antoinette.
My apologies. So I'm going to guess, I can't speak for Mr. Fletcher, but I believe probably what he's referring to is if he takes additional rides with Tango, or I know that Mr. Fletcher uses the Tango app, which he might see the cost of the ride. And so just to give a little bit of context, we cost our Ride on Demand, we do a combined costing, which basically shows the combined Lyft and Tango Car cost, which is generally about $18 per ride. Tango does tend to be a little bit more costly, and that is because they provide wheelchair accessible vehicles, which for that reason, it's a little bit more expensive, but the overall Ride on Demand cost averages about $18 per ride. So in regards to renegotiating contracts and that kind of stuff with our Ride on Demand, we do have a set contract. So because of that, we're kind of, that is what we are obligated to. But we are always in conversations with both of our Ride on Demand partners to include Lyft and Tango to see where we can find efficiencies in both costing and service. So Mr. Fletcher, we're always looking at that.
Thank you, Antoinette. Madam Chair.
Yes, are there any other questions? All right, hearing none. Thank you very much, Sherwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Item number 10 is a presentation on a program called Triumph Las Vegas, and that will be presented by Sydney Marmy.
Yes, thank you,
Sorry,
Madam.
Sydney.
Can you hear me?
Madam Chair, and Sydney, sorry if you don't mind me interjecting. Before you get started, Sydney, could I just get a confirmation? There's a caller on the line, 771. Is that Mr. Robert Lee who's called in? Caller 771 on the line, your line is unmuted. Could I just get a quick confirmation if this is Robert Lee or someone else? Okay, we'll try to circle back on that. My apologies, Sydney. Please continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Sydney Kumarmi, and I'm the Director of Human Resources, and I'm here to present to you how RTC is bringing awareness to and helping to combat human trafficking on the transit system. The acronym Triumph Las Vegas stands for Transit Resource and Information Campaign, uniting and mobilizing to prevent human sex trafficking in Las Vegas. As a background, human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery that involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or to commercially sexually exploit adults and children. Traffickers rely on the transportation industry to recruit, move, and control victims, and among the various methods to deliver victims to buyers, such as the use of cars, vans, airplanes, subways, trains, etc., the use of the bus system is also one of the methods used. To give you an idea of how Nevada ranks in the nation, Polaris reported in 2018, Nevada was 7th in the number of trafficking cases reported by the National Human Trafficking Hotline. In 2019, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department reported 139 adult cases and 116 minor victims, with 102 of those minors being local children. On average, 10 children and 12 adults are identified as victims of being commercially sexually exploited each month in Las Vegas. Next slide, please. RTC applied for the FTA's Innovation in Transportation Public Safety Grant in 2019, and earlier this year, RTC was notified that we were the recipient of the grant to bring awareness to and to help combat human trafficking on the transit system in Las Vegas. The grant will allow RTC to create a comprehensive training program, which begins later this month, to be delivered to frontline employees, bus operators, and security officers to help them identify the signs of human trafficking, to understand where and how RTC's Safe Place program works, to develop protocols for reporting and measuring progress of the program throughout the year, and to help victims reach a safe haven where they can receive services such as emergency housing, medical and behavioral health care support, and victim advocacy. Next slide, please. We are partnering with community leaders to assist with the implementation of the program. Local law enforcement, LVMPD, is guiding us through their processes when addressing human trafficking. And we're also partnering with First Med, who provides a continued comprehensive wraparound service to victims who might need things like emergency housing, medical, and behavioral health care. Another partner is UNLV, School of Criminal Justice. They will evaluate the success of the training program by gathering training data at the implementation and completion of the training program. UNLV will also analyze data collected throughout the year when victims are identified so we understand trends in Las Vegas. Next slide, please. In the fall and leading to January for National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, we will unveil an educational advertising campaign that will include bus wraps, shelter ads, posters at transit and community centers, and social media with goals of providing victims with human trafficking with a source of assistance and for the community to help recognize or identify victims. During the Prevention Month, RTC will make available prevention-based materials at transit facilities and stops, RTC's hotline, First Med's hotline, Safe Place language, and 911. Transit paid media advertising and outreach will include the bus wraps, shelter ads, posters about human trafficking placed on transit vehicles and transit center and the First Med clinics. Anti-trafficking, RTC will also incorporate anti-trafficking efforts to agency policies and protocols to include incident reporting with our Safety and Security Department. And transit professional training will include human trafficking indicators and how to initiate protocol once a situation is suspected, as well as survivor center trauma-informed response protocols to offer them the wraparound services provided by First Med to help heal and stabilize the victims. Next slide, please. The timeline, the project timeline is training to be completed with the RTC frontline and contractors by the end of September, and UNLV data analysis and First Med services through June of 2021. Transit advertising leading up to January Awareness Month, Prevention Awareness Month, is October through December of 2020, and paid media advertising in January of 2021 for the Prevention Month. And with that, this ends my presentation, and I'm happy to take comments or questions.
Thank you, Sydney. Are there any questions? Well, hearing none. This sounds like a really good program, and I hope it works. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Item number 11 is a presentation on the Veterans Medical Transportation Network, and that will be given by Antoinette Braddock.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Chair Payton and committee members. For the record, my name is Antoinette Braddock, Manager of RTC Paratransit and Specialized Services. Today, I'm pleased to provide an update on the RTC's Veterans Medical Transportation Network, also referred to as VMTN. It is important to note that as we are continuing to face significant deficit with our transit fund, we are always looking for opportunities to save revenue. Based on the continued success of our Ride on Demand program, we have some opportunity to incorporate the RTC's VMTN, or Veterans Medical Transportation Network, into utilization of this service and other RTC transit services for an increased cost savings to the agency. Next slide, please. As you know, the RTC is adapting to operations during COVID-19 pandemic, and as such, RTC staff is continually looking for our services and to find creative solutions to maintain important services and reduce agency costs. With that said, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the changes to the Veterans Medical Transportation Program. First, I'm going to provide you a brief overview of what the service currently, or used to, because we've made the changes already, used to look like, and then I'll give you an idea of what the new changes are. So in 2012, the VMTN or the Veterans Medical Transportation Network was established. It was initially funded by a one-time federal grant, and the funding was exhausted within a year. The existing VMTN service provides medical transportation for qualified veterans and their dependents. The service is provided at no cost to the clients. In addition, there is no limit to the number of rides they can take to VA-approved medical appointments. VMTN has historically been provided by the Southern Nevada Transit Coalition, also known as SNTC. The annual cost of that service, or this service, was just over $1.2 million. It's worth noting that the service was initially funded with federal funds using 5310 and 5307 funding, but over the last several years, we opted to allocate that federal funding to capital projects for rolling stock and capital items, and we have been using local funding. So next slide, please. So now I'm going to tell you what's changed. On June 30th, the VMTN contract expired to include all of the renewal options. And this is the contract with SNTC, or Southern Nevada Transit Coalition. With the expiration of this contract, it allowed us to make a smooth transition from the current model to a new multimodal model. Effective July 1st, all qualified veterans now have the opportunity to receive transportation services for their VA-approved medical appointments using one of RTC's existing services. The services include RTC Fixed Route, Paratransit, and as I noted earlier, in some cases, the RTC's Ride on Demand program. Clients who select to use RTC Fixed Route will receive a 30-day pass each month for their transportation. These clients have the option to receive a paper pass or to use the RTC's mobile pass via Ride RTC app. Clients who are better served to use Paratransit either must be currently eligible for Paratransit or become certified for Paratransit. They will be able to schedule rides through RTC customer care, and they will receive unlimited rides to their VA-approved medical appointments. And again, it's just for medical appointments only. And then, even so, in addition to both Fixed Route and RTC Paratransit, we have found that there may even be some veterans who are better suited for our RTC Ride on Demand program, either using Lyft or Tango Car. And if we identify that those customers are better suited there, we'll get them set up on the RTC Ride on Demand pilot program, and they can use one of those two services for their VA-approved medical transportation. By using the already existing RTC services, we expect to save more than $600,000, or half of the current annual VMTN budget. And with that, I can take some questions, but that is my, my prepared comments.
Are there any questions for Antoinette? Antoinette, about how many veterans use the transportation monthly?
Thank you. So pre-COVID, just to give a little bit of context, we were seeing average rides. So it's not necessarily the number of people, but it is average rides at about 2,000 rides per month.
Okay.
And specifically, I can tell you that we have about 800 active veterans that use the service. Now, that utilization, just to give some context, could be that they've used it for one medical appointment in the course of a year, or they might go to dialysis, every other day. So those 800 people kind of vary in the utilization of the service.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Antoinette? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Chair Payton, this is David Gloria.
Oh,
I just wanted
yes,
to
David.
let you know that we're coming up on the last 24 minutes of the meeting. So it would probably be wise to entertain a motion, possibly for an extension of 20 minutes just to be safe, as we're coming up on that 90-minute time limit.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm going to take David's suggestion and ask for a motion to extend our meeting time from 3 p.m. to 3:20 p.m. in order to complete the agenda. So could I have a motion?
Yes, I so move, Madam Chair. This is Dan Hyde.
Thank you, Dan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Very good, thank you. And item number 12 is to receive a presentation on the proposed fall 2020 transit service changes. And that will be given by Francis Julian. And then that will be followed by a public hearing. So this will take a little bit of time, but I think it's a pretty interesting and important thing. So Francis, if you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Francis Julian, Deputy CEO. Today, we'll briefly review the RTC's budget and the proposal transit service change for the fall. Next slide, please. As we all know and have experienced, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the global economy, our transportation infrastructure system, and has changed life as we know it. At the RTC, similar to other local agencies, we have taken several actions to mitigate the financial impacts of COVID-19. Next slide, please. So prior to COVID-19, our transit services was already facing significant financial strain. Our previous revenue and expense projections showed a $6 million shortfall. And when I talk about fiscal year 2020, what we're seeing in blue, this just ended last June. So we just started our 2021 fiscal year. After COVID in 2020, our new projections are actually to have a loss of $24 million. For fiscal year 2021, as I stated, we were predicting a $20 million loss. With the COVID impact, we are now predicting a $102 million deficit for the year. We did actually proceeded to do internal cuts, if you can click for the next slide. And internally, we were actually able to save up to $40 million. It's still, we still have a mountain to climb. We still have a $63 million deficit, but there's a lot of work that was done in the last 3 months to cut drastically our costs. Next slide, please. How did we cut those costs? We eliminated and postponed some capital projects. We suspended and cut and massively cut some of our contracts. We implemented a hiring freeze. Management pay was cut by up to 5%. We just negotiated and signed our collective bargaining agreement with our employees, where they agreed to a salary cut. We laid off or furloughed nearly 15% of our workforce. And today we're proposing significant reduction to our transit services. Next slide, please. So if we take a look at a 5-year outlook to the RTC situation, it's clear that there's a definite problem and a fiscal imbalance that we'll need to fix. We will need to find new funding sources to maintain the transit system that we all know and like. If I can have one click. There was one good news. We did receive some CARES Act money. So the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, we received $112 million. It was, as it was mentioned in another presentation. $24 million of that money will be used in the past fiscal year. If I can have a click, 64 million will actually be, or almost 64 million, will be used to neutralize our budget for this current fiscal year, and 24 million will be used for FY 2022, if I can get a click. So So obviously, this buys us a bit of time to find new funding mechanism, but it is imperative for us as an agency to find new funding source. Otherwise, those transit cuts are probably the first to come. Just to make sure everybody understands, compared to other transit agencies, our two funding sources at the RTC, we only rely on sales tax and fare box revenue. A lot of our peer agencies in the transit world are receiving money from property tax, from fuel tax, and from TNCs, which are the Ubers and Lyft of this world. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing, obviously, at the RTC, we love transit. Our job is not to cut transit, so we really tried to make what made the most sense and what was the least impactful in our community. So the cuts that we're proposing are not contracting the service area, and we're still providing service throughout the valley to our customers. We really tried eliminating some section of routes where transit riders had other options, or where transit routes were in the same walking distance. So there's basically three buckets in the presentation. So we're actually proposing to cut 4 routes. We are proposing to make adjustments to 4 routes, and we're proposing a frequency decrease on 1 route. Next slide, please. But before we make any final decision, we need to hear from the community. We have an open comment period that started on June 29 and that will be open until August 28. We're asking individuals to visit the RTC website and review the detailed change and provide feedback via a brief summary. We're actually doing outreach like today as well, and I'll talk a bit more about this. To date, after 1 month of outreach, we've received more than 3,000 responses to our survey. Next slide, please. So what are the objectives? The objectives are to educate, so basically share, like we're doing today, the proposed service change in a simple, clear manner that's easy to understand. To listen, so gather the feedback either in person or digitally, and take time to hear and respond to the question and concern about the impacts to our riders, and learn. So analyze the data for some hotspots and possibly make adjustments if we can before we go to the board. What is our goal as an outreach? Our goal is to reach 100% of the pre-COVID residential riders on the impacted route. So each route that is impacted, we want to reach each and every rider. We want to reach all the paratransit riders in that specific area as well, even though paratransit will not be affected by those changes. We want to receive input from transit riders that are not affected and non-transit riders from the community, because we're all paying for that system. And basically reach out to general community, as I was mentioning, tax riders or non-riders. Next slide, please. So how are we doing the outreach? We're obviously targeting the areas where those changes will appear. It's either in digital form, but there's a lot of regular mailers, postcards that are done. One-on-one interactions will resume pretty soon. Obviously, with COVID, we weren't able to do as many one-on-one interaction as we wanted. On social media, we're doing geo-targeting advertising, and we're really targeting all the paper marketing to the communities that will be the most effective. Next slide, please. So what are the specific route details? Next slide. The first one is a change that would have happened irregardless of the financial situation. It's the Valley View Arville route with that's called the 104. With the modification we're proposing on 104 are basically to keep the route on Valley View between Russell and Twain. So this is called the Valley View route. So it's normal that it goes on Valley View. In the past, we just couldn't achieve that because there was no connection. But now a major new bridge over the railroad tracks is opening this summer, and that will change that. So we are just aligning that route on its natural path, but we'll still do the outreach for those customers affected that were used to take that transit line on Arville. So there's going to be postcards, door hangers, Facebook ads, and in-person meeting at the transit station. Next slide, please. Route 122, this is a route in Henderson, the Maryland Parkway Horizon Ridge. We're proposing to lower the frequency of that route from every 30 minutes to every 50 minutes. Route 122 has been open now for 4 years. It was the lowest productivity route of the RTC, and we think by bringing it back to 50 minutes, we should get the number of passengers to make that route more sustainable and slowly build the ridership back to eventually bring it back to where it is right now. The weekend service, as we're operating right now under COVID, is and will remain at 60 minutes. Next slide, please. Route 207, so this is the Alta and Stewart line. So we are discontinuing that route, but we will be replacing that route with a Silver Star route that runs 3 to 4 days a week. What are the reasons to discontinue a route? So we actually operate routes on major streets that are 1 mile apart through much of the valley in Las Vegas. Route 207 is an exception. It was running entirely on streets that are half a mile from larger, busier streets and transit services, namely Charleston and Bonanza. Alternative routes are nearby and a vast majority for a vast majority of customers. So 98.8% of the residents and 99.8% of jobs within half a mile of Route 207 are also within half a mile of other routes. The top 20 busiest stops along the route all have other bus routes available at the same intersection or within a quarter mile or less. Next slide, please. Route 209 is exactly the same situation. It's the Vegas and Owens line. So we're proposing to discontinue this route and add a Silver Star route 3 to 4 times a week. Once again, this is a route that was half a mile from other routes. This time they're half a mile from Lake Mead and Washington, which are frequent routes. And riders have easy alternatives. So 99.6% of the residents and 99.9% of the jobs that are within half a mile of this route are also within half a mile of other routes that the RTC runs. The 20 busiest stops along the route, once again, just like the 207, they all have other bus routes available at the same intersection or within a quarter mile or less than 5-minute walk. Next slide, please. The Sahara Express. So we're proposing to restructure and shorten the Sahara Express A and B line. So modifications are being proposed to the route on the east side of the valley, specifically east of Sahara and Lamb, where the Sahara branches off. With Sahara Express A, service along Nellis and Lake Mead would be eliminated. The SXA would instead stay on Sahara and go to Hollywood and would end at Hollywood and Vegas Valley. It's worth noting that the part of the route that would be eliminated would be serviced by other routes. And some of those routes are frequent at 15 minutes interval. The SXB would be slightly shorter, ending at Cabana and Desert Inn. Next slide, please. So we're proposing to eliminate the WAX and heavily modify the CX. And why they're on the same slide, because those were really 2 low productivity routes of the RTC, and we're actually taking the best of both routes and merging them into one. So we're going to replace the lower ridership portion of the CX between downtown Las Vegas and UNLV with the higher ridership routing that was used by the Westcliff Airport Express, creating a new, more efficient CX that serves the most popular destinations on both routes. That new CX would actually service UNLV and Terminal 1, as well as Terminal 3 at the airport. The CX would no longer service the Spring Mountain at Las Vegas Boulevard, Howard Hughes Parkway, or Flamingo and Maryland bus stops that were not utilized as much. So this will actually really create a real express going from Centennial Hill to the BTC, then jump back on the highway, go to UNLV, and then stop at the airport, making it really an efficient route. Next slide, please. The Henderson and Downtown Express will be shortened to run only between Water Street and Boulder City. That route used to go all the way to downtown. The route will stay on I-11 bypassing the Nevada State College, and the Nevada State College will be serviced by the Boulder Highway Express. Next slide, please. The Strip and Downtown Express and the Deuce on the Strip. So we're proposing to discontinue the Strip and Downtown Express, otherwise called the SDX, and increase the Deuce service to 24 hours and increase the frequency on that route. The ridership on the SDX has declined by 1/3 over the last 4 years, and decreases are likely to be accelerated further in the post-COVID new normal. The SDX is really redundant. Almost all stops serving 97% of the stops are shared in between the Deuce and other routes. The SDX is was a fuel inefficient vehicles and higher fare evasion since it's an all-door boarding, makes it the RTC's most expensive route per bus per hour to operate. Relocating main public transit stop for the Las Vegas Convention Center to the Las Vegas Boulevard aligns well with the Convention Center expansion and the new underground people mover system while allowing transit to remain directly on Las Vegas Boulevard. We will actually introduce a downtown shuttle to connect the Las Vegas Premium Outlet Mall to the Deuce. Next slide, please. What are we doing for Paratransit? So Paratransit, there's a small section in Henderson. It's actually exactly 0.3 square mile that will be affected. And we have 12 customers affected in that area. All those customers will be grandfathered in the system. It's worth noting that out of those 12 customers, only one customer rode Paratransit in the last year. But on the tactics of the outreach, we actually, because there's 12 customers, we're making sure that we're making one-on-one interaction with those customers. So it's either going to be by email, written letters, phone calls, or text messages. But we really want, because there's 12 of our customers, we really want to have a personalized approach with them. Next slide, please. So when are the public comments? We actually had our first YouTube live last night from 5 to 7. Today we have our meeting that we're in, so we'll take comments afterwards. And next week we'll be in person at the Bonneville Transit Center from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the morning, and then from 5 to 7 o'clock at night to answer any question and take all comments. Next slide. And this concludes my report. I've got one more item. I've got the timeline. So the timeline, as I mentioned, we're working from June 29 to August 28 to get all the comments. We will be seeking board approval on September 10th, and the service change could occur as quickly as October 4th this coming fall. And this concludes my report. I'm available to take any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Are there any questions? I do actually have one. On the combination of the route that goes from Centennial and will go down to the airport, will it still stop at the West Cliff? Stop or not? I couldn't tell from the map.
No, it will not stop at the West Cliff. So the West Cliff will be serviced by 2 other routes, but the West Cliff ridership on the current West Cliff Express was actually pretty low.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other specific questions for Julian?
Madam Chair, this is Ray.
Yes.
All right, Francis, I'm a little concerned because on the website with your handout, your download for the 207, the 209, and the WAX, they differ than your handout from the SDX in that on the SDX, you have a map of your proposed change, whereas on the aforementioned ones, you have no outline, no nothing to let the riders know what changes may be. Is there a reason that you didn't put that or it wasn't placed on the 207, 209, or WAX and only on the SDX?
Thank you for the question, Raymond. I'm not sure I understand your question because all the routes we identified, we have maps. So when you look at the 207, we can actually go back. But what I just showed in my slide is the marketing elements that we have. So we're basically showing what the current route is, and obviously when it's discontinued, it wouldn't be there. But if I look at the Sahara Express, we're looking at the section that will be discontinued as well.
Well, if you look at the RTC website under the elimination tab, you have Route 207, 209. You click on download handout and it props up another window. It doesn't have the map of the proposed changes. But when you click on the SDX, you do have a map of the changes. And I was just curious as why you had the map on one of them, but not the others.
Good comment, Raymond. We'll ask the government affairs team to go and check the website, but the material that we vetted is exactly all the maps that should be on the website are exactly the map that should be on my presentation. But we'll go and take a second look to make sure that there was not a link missing on the website.
Okay, and a follow-up, if I may. The 12 people that you say would be impacted by the elimination of the routes or the changes, was that just the HDX, the Henderson one you were talking about, or does that include the 104, 207, and 209? I've heard a number of comments and concerns about individuals losing their paratransit along the 207, 209 because at that point they would be outside of that 3/4 mile.
No, they would not be outside the 3/4 mile because they're bordered by two routes that are 1 mile apart. The 12 impacted customers are in the Henderson area, on the outskirts of Henderson, where the HDX used to go by.
Okay, thank you. I'll make sure to clarify for those that are concerned about losing their transit.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Francis?
Madam Chair, this is Chuck Newbunner for the record. Raymond addressed the portion of what I was going to ask, but to our speaker, the offer to assist with communication for paratransit eligible riders that may be impacted by any of these adjustments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, last chance for committee members.
I'm Robert Lee. I have been on the phone, but I had to leave and come back.
Okay. Hi, Robert.
Hello.
Did you have a comment or a question for Francis?
No, I just want to let you know that I was here.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's time to have the public hearing. And so Eileen Pastor, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Eileen Pastor, Government Affairs Supervisor for the record. I do not have any emailed comments for the public hearing. However, I will turn it over to Sue Christiansen to read any comments that we've received via YouTube Live.
Hi, thank you, Eileen. Sue Christiansen for the record, Engagement and Media Supervisor for the RTC. Currently, there are no public comments at this time.
All right, thank you very much. So I think that completes this part of our agenda. So item number 13 is the second public comment period. The rules are a little bit different. This can be about your comment can be about any issue regarding RTC, transit, or planning. We'd ask you, comments were submitted either on the website or by email. The first 500 words will be read on the comment, but the remainder of the comments will be posted in the minutes. So I will ask Eileen Pastor if there are any comments for the second community public comment period.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Again, Eileen Pastor for the record. We do have one public comment from Alita Dupree. Greetings, Committee Chair Jean Payton and members. Alita Dupree for the record. Briefly, I comment on miscellaneous matters concerning TAAC. I use the Ride RTC app. It works well for me. I think we should add single ride tickets to the app. I also feel it's time to move away from paper tickets, especially in this crisis. We should have a stored value card for those who don't have app-capable phones. This can reduce interaction and touching of the fare box and promote distancing from operators. Paratransit and university tickets should be available on the Ride RTC app and a stored value card. I do support the proposed changes to the Sahara Express and Deuce SDX. Thanks for your work with the Veterans Medical Transportation Network. Thank you. Madam Chair, that concludes the public comments received.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments from the committee members? Hearing none.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Raymond.
All right, I'm moving forward just out of curiosity. Is there a plan or a method in place for people that use paratransit services to purchase their ticket through the app? Now, I know I personally use the transit app more than the Ride RTC just because it's easier for me to get the fixed route scheduling. But you could get a fixed route ticket through that app. But for those that use paratransit, you have to have that exact $3. And what if you're a person that doesn't carry cash, and you don't have that $3, or you don't have a way to get down to the BTC or one of the other designated areas, especially during this pandemic, to get a monthly pass? What methods are we working on to try to make it much easier for passengers?
Madam Chair, Dan Howland for the record with RTC. Raymond, great question. And I can tell you this without getting into the real specifics, but I think that's something that we can look at for future presentation to the committee. Obviously looking at different ways for payment methods. To your point, the flexibility that it provides customers is certainly something that we're looking at. And, obviously it's easier said than done, but there is a lot of good technology out there that's being looked at in conjunction with other technology that we already have. So that is noted, and we are working on it, and we will come back with a presentation in a near future meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dan. And in the interim, I do look forward to your presentation on that. In the interim, is there a way that you and I can speak offline about that?
We certainly may.
Thank you.
To do that. Thank you.
Are there any other comments?
Yes, this is Robert Lee.
Yes, Robert.
I support that stored value thing, because then you can add it wherever you are, at home or office or wherever you are. Then you could add money to that stored value card if you use paratransit or the city bus. Many cities do that now. Then they don't have to touch anything. They just put it up against the box of the machine wherever it is. And that's all I have to say about that.
Well, it sounds like the folks in paratransit are going to look at options. So I think that that's really good.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. And Raymond, thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you, ma'am. Just for some people, some people just have dexterity issues in handling money. And especially with the pandemic going on, people don't want to handle money or tickets or other items. And anything that we can do to help stop the potential spread, even if it's something as little as scanning our phone or having some kind of digital ticket, or even an app to do it on, anything to increase the social distancing and open up our state quicker.
We agree. All right, last chance. Anyone that has a comment or concern? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dan. And we stand adjourned. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good day.
You too.